What kind of people sail deep into the Arctic Circle with a piano, a silver tea set, and absolutely no idea how to survive? British people. No, all sorts of people it turns out, and for all manner of reasons. The men who mapped the Arctic during this period were some of the craziest people to ever do it. The last hurrah of a dying breed, the explorer. But its history hides some unexpected secrets. They were so confident, so uninformed, and so underprepared. It's almost funny if it wasn't so tragic. The answer to where this mass delusion came from and why this generation specifically was so fixated on polar exploration lies in the period itself. In 1875, the British Empire is at its peak. The Prime Minister had just bought shares in the Suez Canal, securing another critical trade route, and imperial expansion was daily news. But the shadow of John Franklin's expedition to conquer the Northwest Passage still haunted the nation. The tragedy had been romanticized to mystical proportions, and the prestige of Arctic exploration was approaching martyrdom. With the Crimean War over, young men were starved for glory and purpose, and the Navy, the natural home of restless souls, actively supported Arctic exploration, as it helped preserve institutional prestige at a time when not much was to be had. Many officers were upper middle class, socially ambitious younger sons, where naval distinction was one of the few upward routes. The crew on board these ships were a reflection of the society that they came from. Restless, boisterous, eager to prove themselves, but under the bravado hiding a peculiar darkness and deep insecurities. At the helm, driving these doomed voyages were forces of nature, men of obsession, no more stoppable than the pack ice they drove through. Researching the many captains of polar exploration, we noticed something striking. They all had the same goal, but showed fundamentally different philosophies through their actions. What kind of captain would you be? The kind who knows best, listens to no one, and sails straight into disaster like Franklin? Or the kind who values survival over glory, willing to abandon the mission if it means bringing people home, like Shackleton? It might not be as simple as you think, but it comes down to your beliefs, your values, and your non-negotiables. At your local Arctic expedition recruiting office, we can divide everyone into two categories: people that deceived themselves and people that were deceived by others. And this deception had two powerful ingredients: a dream and urgency. Money, honor, glory, but what if someone else gets there first? It's a bit like game projects, I guess. Some crazy people convince investors and employees, no, this time it's really going to work. There's a whirlwind of fear of missing out, greed, and ambition, and at the end of it, the modern equivalent of the Franklin disaster. The process of defining our characters is more than a haircut. Everything starts with history, real people, confident that the world could be conquered with enough certainty, Welsh wigs, and an impressive number of wool layers, or those brave, foolish, or world-weary enough to follow them. The Northwest Passage and North Pole mania, led by figures like Franklin, Scott, and Shackleton, shaped a very specific idea of what exploration was supposed to be. Noble, heroic, and above all, inevitable. That's how it was presented at the time. In retrospect, it was far less triumphant. Most expeditions failed. Many never returned. Success depended less on bravery than on adaptation, something British explorers in particular often struggled with. These expeditions were enormously expensive and frequently privately funded. Rescue missions for crews that had vanished were often just as dangerous as the expeditions themselves, sometimes requiring rescue in turn. It was an easy sell to the public, but a hard one for governments and investors. These dichotomies between confidence and hubris, ambition and reality, are pivotal to how we define characters. They should not feel like puppets barking out an agenda or current worldview. Our goal is to develop them fully, giving them an entire life lived up to the point they appear in our story. They also must be a product of their time. You don't want to feel like, this is a conversation I could hear at my local Tesco or McDonald's.
The late Victorian era is one of the most imaginative and fascinating parts of history, one that we're all very familiar with from modern media. We have a clear mental image of steam engines clattering across continents, electric light illuminating city streets, and breakthroughs in medicine and science that seem to signal a world on the brink of something new. But far away from London's noise of progress, there was a different kind of industry. Ancient, unimaginably powerful forces of nature, grinding and cracking ice. The Devil's Symphony, the explorers called it. The last unknown, uncharted regions at the tip of the globe. It's to this blank space the world turned its attention. The Arctic and the quest of the Northwest Passage captured the public imagination. Not only was it an extreme test of human character in harsh conditions, but the mystery of what might be found reached feverish heights. The idea of conquering the Arctic became a lucrative spectacle, and of course, a matter of national pride, a particularly appealing prospect to an empire facing decline, or smaller nations entering a global stage. But looked at more closely, that narrative reveals the actual consequence of this attitude. The very same confidence that filled lecture halls and newspapers' columns also concealed uncertainty, risk, and profound misunderstanding. The Arctic is often imagined as a setting, a dramatic backdrop for human struggle, but in reality it behaves less like scenery and more like a participant of the story. It shapes the events people are going through. Cold, isolation, scarce resources, and constant danger have a way of narrowing a person's world to what is immediately essential. Plans fall apart, authority and attitudes undergo innumerous tests, beliefs that change once they face the merciless reality of life. In The Perilous North, we are taking an effort to show how our characters' personalities may change when they're tired and cold, didn't get much sleep, or have walked throughout the night listening to the sounds of the wilderness. Clothing stops being a fashion statement and becomes a matter of survival. Tools stop being equipment and become lifelines. Mental resilience matters just as much as physical strength. What would this place do to a person? How would it change the way they behave and treat others?
Even as late as 1875, British and American expeditions vastly underestimated the brutal cold that exists in these regions. There are many accounts of explorers writing of the innumerable expensive layers of wool clothing on board, not realizing the value of good reindeer fur or sealskin gloves, or sweating profusely working during the day only to freeze in their soggy clothes at night. The British were obsessed with tradition and etiquette, but less so about personal hygiene or even survival. And that may still be true. A crucial part of our research is the native peoples of Greenland and the wider Arctic. These people thrived in conditions that early European explorers could barely step foot in. Their clothing, tools, housing, hunting methods, social structures, and even religion were all tailored to this alien environment. They were also the unsung heroes of many expeditions. Whole native families could be recruited, with toddlers often faring better than grown men. Knowledge and help, sometimes given freely, was, particularly in the early periods, scorned and led to quite avoidable tragedies.
The late Victorian era unfolded alongside the height of British imperial expansion. Much of what people understood about the world was filtered through the language of the empire, where distant lands were framed as territories to be mapped, named and claimed, and the cultures within them were often misunderstood or dismissed. In The Perilous North, we don't shy away from this. Characters carry these beliefs with them, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. Their assumptions, prejudices, and blind spots are parts of who they are. Our job is not to push you towards any point of view really, but show you some events and let you decide what you feel.
In modern England, class segregation, though in steep decline, was still very much a thing, and even at the end of the world, people with any connection to civilization expected you to behave and dress in a manner that befits your station. The crew's occupation is determined by life circumstances, and what they do is a huge part of who they are. Cooks, sailors, scientists, hunters, doctors, they were often born into these roles, and people act in the way that they are expected to. It was a simpler time for both explorers and natives, where life, though full of hardship, was far more straightforward. The ultimate goal is to create a time capsule for you to step into and get immersed in. And despite their flaws, or maybe because of them, we hope you'll fall in love with our characters just as much as we have.
They are meant to feel like individuals shaped by a particular moment in history, some admirable, some deeply flawed. By grounding them in documented events, human misjudgment, and genuine ambition, we're trying to build a world that feels lived in rather than staged for a particular narrative purpose, unforgiving rather than romanticized, and honest rather than symbolic. This is where character creation in The Perilous North truly begins.
The scarcity of Arctic anything in all media is one of the big reasons we've decided to make a game about it. Our job as developers is to give you something you didn't even know you wanted. If you're interested in supporting the game, you can come and wishlist it on Steam. We count every single one. They really make a difference. We also have a Patreon set up for the project if you'd like to help the game out financially. There's no pressure, nothing on earth will stop this game from coming out. If we're strapped for cash, this might help fund quality of life features like voiceover for dialogue or better animations. This was a bit different to our usual updates on the game, but this is not a replacement for devlogs. We're making solid headway developing the Perilous North, and we have some very cool stuff to share soon. So stay tuned and we'll see you in the next update.